What's up everyone, I'm Eldritch and welcome to the very first episode ever of Daily Dose of Donkey, the show in which I bring you some of my stupid donkey face every day. And in this premiere episode, we are going to talk about something that is very, very dear to my heart. And that is, of course, Camelot Unchained. What is Camelot Unchained? Let me school you nerds. Camelot Unchained is in fact an MMORPG that is currently still in production, and it is developed by City State Entertainment, who themselves are headed up by Mark Jacobs. Mark Jacobs used to be the CEO of Mythic Entertainment, the company responsible for making Dark Age of Camelot and Warhammer Online. Dark Age of Camelot was my favorite game of all time, and as such I'm obviously excited about Camelot Unchained. And so full disclosure guys, I'm biased when it comes to this game. Even if the game ends up being not that great, I'm probably gonna love it, so definitely make sure that even if you follow my coverage on it, you keep an open mind and maybe even read up on it a bit for yourself. So in this series of Camelot Unchained videos, I'm mainly going to talk about the class reveals. But since a lot of you probably don't even know what Camelot Unchained is all about, I'm also going to talk a little bit about what the game does and what is so special about it. So Camelot Unchained is going to be an RVR focused MMORPG. RVR, or Realm vs Realm, or Tri-Realm Combat, or however else you want to call it, basically means that your entire game sort of focuses around the idea of a faction-based PvP system, where you have 2 to 3, sometimes even more factions, but 3 is sort of the sweet spot, that are engaged in a constant war against each other. In a way, you could say that PlanetSide 2 kind of also falls into this category. And Camelot Unchained, incidentally, is going to be a lot like PlanetSide 2, just in a fantasy world with magic and swords, but not necessarily focused on that sort of standard Tolkien fantasy stuff, but instead focused on ancient mythologies. The 3 realms in Camelot Unchained are the Arthurians, who you can probably tell by their name are focused all around British folklore and the mythos of King Arthur. And then you have the Twa-headed Danann, who are focused all around Celtic lore, and specifically Irish lore. Now there are also influences of Welsh and Scottish and Gaulish mythologies in the Twa-headed Danann, but most of it is really focused around the Irish folklore. And then the 3rd realm is the Vikings. And the Vikings are of course what you would expect. They're all about strength and seafaring, and you have dwarves and ice giants and Valkyries, and they're all about brute force and strength. Now the entire point of the game is that there really isn't going to be any PvE progression. Now I want to make this part clear, that doesn't necessarily mean that there isn't going to be any PvE enemies, that there's not going to be any monsters. There can be monsters, but there's not going to be an experience system from those monsters. So you're not going to have to go grind monsters or do quests to kill monsters to level up your character. Your character's progression is purely tied to the PvP, and the progression isn't exactly vertical, it's a little bit more gradual. So yes, your character gets stronger, and most of the progression that your character is going to experience is going to have to do more with options and not necessarily with pure strength. So the stats of your character are going to increase, but as some stats increase, others might decrease. There's also going to be a lot of other stuff like in-depth crafting systems that actually require you to pick a crafting class. They're planning a fully player-driven economy, and they already have a system in place where you can build houses and walls and castles in sort of a Minecraft on crack kind of way. As the weeks progress, I'm going to go more into detail on all of these things and tell you all about them. But now let's get to the meat of this video, and that is the class reveal that happened last Friday. As you saw in the background, they are teasing us with all of these shadows for the classes. And then when the class reveal happens each Friday, they finally show us this. And the first reveal that we see right here is for the Devout archetype. Now it's very important for me to mention that the archetypes don't mean that these are all the same classes, just in different clothes. It just means that they sort of fill the same role. In this case, the Devout is a hybrid healer. That means it's both a mage and a healer, but the way they function can still be vastly different. This game is not going to have structured, mirrored classes in the way that Warhammer Online, for example, had them, but instead the classes are just roughly grouped into the roles that they're supposed to fulfill, and then how they fulfill those roles might be differing quite heavily between each one. Alright then, let's get to it. The first one of these 3 classes is the Abbott. The Abbott is the Arthurian Devout class and is an interesting hybrid between a magic user, a sort of support healer, but he also uses melee weapons in the form of his flails or even the quarterstaff that he can unlock. To sort of sum up what this class is about, think about it like a battle cleric. He calls down the wrath of his god to smash the heathen enemies. But at the same time, he also really likes beer. And while we of course don't yet know exactly what the class is going to do and how much damage it's going to do, because all those values are still being worked on, the abilities that they are showing to us do give us a little bit of a feel of what the class is going to do. Now at this point I should also explain what they mean by component samples. I'm going to go into more detail with this next week, but the basics is that the abilities in Camelot Unchained are built by you. You don't get Fireball rank 1, you will get the rune Fire and the ball shape, and then maybe the burning modal, and you put those three together and then you have a burning fireball that will strike an enemy at a distance and then set them on fire. For now, let's just look at the theme of what these things do. So for the Abbott, we have the Radiant Smite, which deals a high amount of radiant damage to the target and leaves light briefly lingering in the area. Next we have Arcane Fervor, applies a reaction which applies an enhancement that increases magic damage for a moderate duration the next time the target deals magic damage, or if applied multiple times applies a stronger reaction with the same effect up to a limited amount. Basically what this means is you put that on a friendly target and the next time they deal magic damage, their magic damage from then on is increased. It's sort of like a delayed buff, but it is also kind of cool because it will provide the buff when they actually need it. So you can apply these buffs pre-combat and then when you engage, they just cast a spell and then they receive the buff for their next spells. So then while you're in combat, you don't actually have to worry about applying your buffs anymore because you've already done that, which I think is a really cool system. The next ability works very similar. Elaborate Preparation applies a reaction which applies an enhancement that reduces ability preparation and recovery times for a moderate duration the next time the user deals damage, or if applied multiple times, applies a stronger reaction with the same effect up to a limited amount. And this is obviously very similar to Arcane Fervor in that it reduces the ability preparation and recovery times, but it also works for melee users, so that's kind of the difference there. And instead of increasing raw damage, it really just increases sort of rate of fire, if you will. And then lastly, the Abbot receives the ability to use a quarterstaff to basically turn him into a staff-using monk kind of buffy smiting character, which is pretty damn cool. Alright, next we're going to look at the Hellbound, the Devout class for the Viking realm. And the Hellbound is of course blessed by the goddess Hel. Hel is the goddess of the underworld in Norse and Germanic mythology, and sadly by a very Christian culture decried as Satan, but she is absolutely not that. Hel in mythology is actually always described as a very kind goddess, but she's also described as being a very two-faced goddess, so a little bit bipolar if you will. And the same goes for the Hellbound, which is sort of both a death and life mage. But let's look at the component samples, and now we can see a few different components than we saw with the Abbot. We still have two runes, the Incessant Atrophy, which applies an affliction which deals death damage to the target over time and reduces their stamina and blood amounts. So this is basically your average dot and debuffing ability. He also has Gruesome Rejuvenation, which applies a renewal which restores blood and stamina to the target over time. So basically a heal over time effect. But now we're also being shown two modal and one infusion ability. Basically think of these as upgrades to abilities that make the abilities stronger but also increase their cast times and the recovery times and all that sort of thing. And first we have Aspect of Life. The user takes on an aspect of life, reducing all resistances and building life force over time. Life abilities additionally grant a protection which reduces the damage taken by the target based on the amount of health they are missing. So you can basically add this to your life abilities to add kind of a shield to your abilities. But at the same time you're paying for it by going more into the life force direction and also reducing your own resistances. And then we have the opposite aspect of death. The user takes on an aspect of death, increasing all resistances and building death force over time. Death abilities inflict a vulnerability, which increases the power of death abilities the target is affected by. The power of this vulnerability increases each time the target is affected by a death ability, up to a maximum amount over a moderate duration. So basically a debuff that increases your damage on the target the more you use your abilities on that target. But at the same time it pushes you towards death force, which I'm guessing is sort of a binary mechanic where you push a bar to either life or death, and if you push it towards life, you can't really do that much damage anymore, and if you push it towards death, you probably can't do as much healing anymore. And maybe there's other severe things that happen if you push it too far in one direction. I don't know exactly yet, but that's how I would imagine it, and I do think it sounds pretty cool, and it's very thematic for a character that follows Hel. And then lastly we have the Blessed Crow, the Devout class for the Tuatha De Danann. The really cool thing about the Blessed Crow is that its weapon is a cauldron. So basically the trick with this class is you put your cauldrons down somewhere and then you can make spell effects happen from that cauldron. But the more you use a specific cauldron, the more it overflows. And at some point it's overflowing so much that it's being destroyed. Really cool concept, this class, with basically putting down cauldrons and then using them as points of origin for your spells, which has all sorts of interesting implications for keep sieges and fights in small corridors and such. And the way I would describe this class is sort of like a necromancer / necrophage healer. So the components that we have are Corpse Consuming Brew. Consumes nearby corpses in order to restore health to nearby group members, based on the number of corpses consumed. So you inflict death and you use up death to heal your friends. And then we have Necrotic Concoction. Deals death magic to targets, also reducing their blood and stamina. So once again, we have damage combined with a little bit of debuffing. But now we have a new ability here in the octagon shape. Billowing Cloud is a shape ability. A volumetric cloud which expands over time as a channeled effect. So basically what this means, this replaces the ball or wall or ray or whatever else other spells usually just have, like say a fireball or a frost bolt. Just like they are a ball or bolt shape, this is a cloud shape. And so you could, for example, use this system to build a Necrotic Cloud by taking the Necrotic Concoction rune and adding the Billowing Cloud shape. And then you would channel death damage, presumably over time, in a cloud area that would expand over time as you channel it. And lastly, we have Overcharge Overflow, which is an infusion again, but the spell is going to be more expensive or have a longer preparation or recovery time. And it allows a cauldron at its maximum cauldron overflow to be used by this ability without being destroyed. Alright guys, that is it for your daily dose of Donkey on the 6th of October 2015. And for the next 9 weeks I will be talking about Camelot Unchained on the Saturday episode of Daily Dose of Donkey. But until then, I've been the Cloaking Donkey, and I'll see you in another video.